My name is Steven Blokmans. I'm a professor of EU External Relations Law and Governance at the University of Amsterdam, and I head the EU Foreign Policy unit at the Centre for European Policy Studies, CEPS, which is a think tank based in Brussels. So the idea for this interregional cooperation initiative is to increase interregional cooperation between East Asia, Northeast Asia in particular, and other regions. And of course, the European Union as well as ASEAN could play an important role in that respect in order to beef up not just economic governance but also efforts of increasing security throughout a wider region. Well, the low edge of the wedge is indeed to find territories, policy areas where there is commonality of interest and an impetus for political willingness to mature into concrete cooperation in the field. I think here what Korea and partners in the Northeast Asia context could do is to look, of course, at the partners in the region, but also further beyond. You may have distant relatives in your family, for example, in Europe, that are interested to increase more general Asia-Europe cooperation, which has been embodied for many years, since 1996, in the ASEM, Asia-Europe Economic Meeting, which of course is developed along those lines in the economic field, and the Republic of Korea, of course, in 2000 hosted the summit and was chaired at the time by Nobel Peace Prize laureate Kim Dae-jung, very respected. I think there's still mileage in this ASEM initiative, which is maybe slipped into the background a little bit, not just in the economic front, but also to try and bring to the fore more non-traditional security issues, which are of common interest. We are in Jeju, where there is at the moment a mini crisis around refugees. The flow of migrants and refugees is something which entertains politicians and policymakers across the globe, and of course in an Asia-Europe context this could be emboldened. But it goes further than that in the areas of fighting terrorism, in piracy, and of course corruption more generally. These are areas which are politically sensitive nonetheless, but which are not solely domestic and have an international, interregional component, which could be addressed in initiatives such as ASEM, and this is, as I mentioned, just one of the efforts or avenues that Korea and Northeast Asia partners could look at. Right. So a lot of initiatives have indeed been created. We speak at a time when Jim Mattis is in Beijing, trying to reassert, of course, U.S. interests in the region, and specifically with China. China has been very active in the South China Sea. The US is trying to curb that increased power, of course, by keeping international maritime lanes open and insisting on freedom of navigation also throughout the South China Sea. And it has developed a wider concept of Indo-Pacific cooperation, which centers around economic and security interests. Meanwhile, China has, as you mentioned in your question, taken inroads quite literally through several silk routes into Central Asia as well as Europe. And I think here there are plenty of initiatives which are being created, which show that whilst multilateralism may have suffered as a result of an America First policy of Mr. Trump, which is translating, it seems, into an America Alone reality mostly, where other actors are trying to increase their interregionalism and cooperation. And China is certainly doing that by throwing its economic weight around in big infrastructure projects also in Europe. but rubbing up against structural differences which exist in economic policy, and which from the European side, which is a heavily institutionalized form of regulatory cooperation, of course, leads to insistence on screening of foreign direct investment, adherence to transparency in public procurement, competition law and state aid rules which ought to be observed. So you see a proliferation of all kinds of initiatives, also by the US in that context, which give you an idea that whilst multilateralism may be under strain at the moment, interregionally is not waning. There are offshoots that could produce new forms of cooperation and hopefully set new rules also at the global scale. Right, I think first, as far as the US, Russia, China are concerned, of course there are regional as well as global powers, and they have been supportive of the different sides on the 38th parallel, and in that sense bear great responsibility at nudging both parts on the Korean peninsula closer to a denuclearization solution for the peninsula. They again show differences in approach, and we've not only seen this in the sanction area, where China and Russia have been more accommodating to North Korean concerns and left channels open. We've also seen this on the US side, and of course the grand overture that Mr. Trump made at the Singapore summit with the North Korean leader suggests that normal ways, certainly normal American ways of diplomacy, are being reinvented sometimes on the fly. This is not necessarily conducive, I think, to a structural, durable solution, and it would be wiser from that point of view to extract this issue from the several bilateral tracks on which North Korea seems to be moving, both with China, of course, in several occasions, with South Korea on a number of occasions, and with US. I think the world powers would do well, and this brings in the European dimension, would do well in bringing this back into the fold of the UN Security Council. A specific expertise which the European Union as an organization above and beyond its individual member states who are part of the Security Council can bring is, I think, drawn from the Iran nuclear deal experience, where the EU has been facilitating for more than a decade the talks which led to the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, and which has been also supervising as a monitoring body, the implementation of the Iran nuclear deal. I think there might be elements, not just to copy-paste the model which has been used there, but there might be elements in both the procedural as well as the substantive form of the Iran nuclear arrangements, which could be used for the denuclearization issue on the Korean peninsula, and thereby bring in an EU expertise. Well, regionalism in itself, so stepping away from interregionalism, is suffering, some strains as well. If we look at the European Union, of course, as a result of Brexit and the rise of populism in Central European countries as well as Italy, you see that the integration momentum is somehow faltering. I do think, however, if you look a little deeper, that Brexit and the refugee and migrant crisis, of course, all the violent conflicts on the eastern and the southern front of the European neighborhood, have resulted in a so-called integration dividend, which show that the European Union member states find that there is added value in working together at a higher level, that of the EU, in order to protect their own interests collectively. And so you see integration moves happening at the European Union, slowly but surely, as a result of Brexit, as a result of these crises in the field of external border management, and in an expeditionary sense, also the beefing up of security and defense arrangements in Europe. regionalism in ASEAN, which is probably key towards any future inter-regional arrangement between Europe and Asia writ large, has also suffered, I think, from the classic ASEAN way of doing things, which is premised on respect for sovereignty, rightly so, non-interference into domestic affairs, but which has made this intergovernmental mode of functioning rather slow, albeit steady. I think there is room for improvement there too. And other forms of regionalism that we have seen on the Northeast Asian side, they still have to come to full fruition. So looking at it around the world, it's maybe the area of Latin America, in fact, where you see most promising signs of regionalism translating into concrete cooperative action at the moment, and we see a steeper learning curve and implementation curve than in other parts of the world. I think the Forum has taken a very important role in promoting peace and prosperity throughout the peninsula as well as Asia writ large, and I think it should continue on this track, because unfortunately the world has moved in a direction which is more of contestation rather than cooperation. So I think there's stay the course would be my advice. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope to be contributing in the future.